Welcome back to the deep dive. Have you ever stopped to think, really think, about how much of our daily lives hangs on, well, a single thread in this massive global supply chain? It's incredibly interconnected, right? But also surprisingly fragile. One little hiccup somewhere could be anywhere, and the whole system feels the shockwaves. So, our mission today in this deep dive is to unpack why putting all your eggs in one basket, or getting all your parts from just one factory, is becoming a risk that nations and big companies just aren't willing to take anymore. We're getting to supply chain diversification. Our goal is for you to get up to speed quickly on why this big strategic shift is happening right now. We'll be pulling out some key insights, those crucial nuggets of knowledge from folks like India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, plus various business reports and expertise on risk and trade. So the big question we're tackling is, what does diversifying a supply chain actually mean? And why is everyone, everywhere, talking about it right now?
That's a perfect way to frame it, because what's really, truly fascinating is how recent events have just completely changed the game. Resilience in supply chains. It's gone from being, a strategic nice-to-have to an absolute must-have, a non-negotiable, really. Just think about it. Geopolitical friction, economic uncertainty, massive disruptions like COVID-19. They've all thrown a harsh spotlight on just how vulnerable you become with over-reliance. It was a very painful and very expensive lesson learned very fast.
Yeah, and it seems like that lesson really hit home globally. You mentioned Jaishankar's warning about sector hollowing.
Mhm.
That sounds pretty serious. But beyond the long-term strategy, what were some of those immediate real-world jolts that really forced everyone's hand?
That's a crucial point. A major driver, and India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has been quite vocal about this, is the need for Indian businesses to avoid, quote, over-reliance on China's supply chain. Now, he acknowledges China's huge role, something like 33% of global manufacturing, which is, massive. It's a reality. But he warns about the danger of sector hollowing. That's where a country gets so excessively dependent on a single supply chain that it effectively stops being an innovator or producer itself. It just becomes merely a market for another economy, as he put it. It hollows out your own industrial strength.
Wow. So it's not just what you buy, but where you buy it from basically shapes your whole economic future.
Yeah.
And we're seeing these immediate problems too, right? Like the Red Sea issues.
Exactly. Jashankar's talked quite a bit about the Red Sea shipping disruptions. These aren't theoretical risks. They're actively pushing up transport costs, hitting global trade right now. It's even prompted the Indian Navy to step in and help. That's a really clear, current example of how one single pinch point can cause ripples everywhere. He also brought up issues in India-Russia trade, things like SPS restrictions, that's sanitary and phytosanitary stuff, plus non-tariff barriers, different standards. These are often complex ways trade gets blocked, hindering exports. It shows the risks are multifaceted. It's not just about relying on one factory complex.
Okay, it's pretty clear then. This isn't just about one country or one specific product. It feels like a fundamental rethink of how everyone involved in global trade views their connections, their dependencies. So when we use the term supply chain diversification, what are we really talking about? Is it just having plan B and plan C?
Well, at its heart, supply chain diversification, like our sources Rello and Wikipedia define it, is about strategically spreading your production out. Multiple suppliers, different regions. But the key insight here, I think, is that it's not just about finding the cheapest price somewhere else. It's really about building a robust network. You want suppliers who can offer comparable, maybe even interchangeable products, but each brings something different to the table. Maybe it's speed, maybe quality, maybe they help you navigate specific regulations. It's about building a web, a resilient web, not just a single fragile line.
That makes a lot of sense. Sort of smart redundancy plus flexibility. And the reports we looked at from BSI and Rello, they mentioned some really compelling benefits, almost surprising ones, that go beyond just dodging risks. What stood out to you there?
Yeah, one thing that's quite interesting is how diversification can actually fuel faster growth, not just stability. By setting up multiple production points, companies effectively boost their total network capacity so they can scale up faster, grab new market opportunities, instead of being bottlenecked by one facility. And alongside that, yes, you absolutely get greater stability, less exposure if one supplier or region hits trouble. Plus, it opens doors, right? Wider access to different materials, maybe new tech or machinery, different labor pools, a truly global network.
So it's not just a defensive shield, it can be an offensive play for growth too. And there are tactical upsides as well, aren't there?
Oh, absolutely. Strategically, you can get shorter lead times, maybe through onshoring, bringing production home, or nearshoring, bringing it closer. And don't forget duty advantages. Manufacturing in countries covered by favorable trade deals, think NAFTA, CAFTA, GSP, that can offer significant cost savings through lower tariffs. All these tactical moves add up to much greater agility, adaptability. You build in that crucial flexibility, those backup plans, for when, not if, disruptions happen.
So, for you listening, whether you're a consumer wondering about availability or at a business trying to compete, this isn't just some jargon. It's a fundamental shift. It affects everything. And we can see this happening right now in real time. The Apple example is just fascinating, a real case study in re-engineering a massive supply chain. Can you give us a sense of the scale of Apple's move into India? What's the headline number that jumps out?
The scale is honestly astonishing. By March in the last fiscal year, Apple assembled something like $22 billion worth of iPhones in India. That's a jump of nearly 60% year on year. Think about that. What it means is that roughly 1 in every 5 iPhones made globally, 20% of global output now comes from India. This incredible growth, really fueled by government incentives like India's Production-Linked Incentive Scheme, the PLI scheme, shows just how fast supply chains can shift when there's strategic alignment between a government and, well, a tech giant like Apple, working with partners like Foxconn and Tata Electronics.
1 in 5? That's huge in such a short time. So who are the main players making this happen on the ground in India?
Well, Foxconn is still the biggest player, holding about 65% of the Indian iPhone output share in 2024. And they're putting more money in new investments, already testing production for future models like the iPhone 16. But Tata's rise is also really significant. They hit 35% of India's iPhone output by 2025. They did this partly through smart acquisitions like buying Wistron's facility and taking a big stake in Pegatron's India unit. And Tata's even expanding into after-sales service. That suggests, a much bigger long-term ambition for India to build out a whole tech ecosystem, not just assembly.
Right, but there's always a but, isn't there?
Yeah.
Our sources keep stressing that despite this massive shift to India, China's gravity is still immense. What's the reality check on how embedded Apple still is in China?
Oh, the reality is China remains absolutely central to Apple's world. They still have over 200 suppliers there. And China still accounts for, get this, more than 75% of global iPhone production. There was an estimate from Bloomberg Intelligence back in 2022 suggesting it would take maybe 8 years to move just 10% of Apple's production capacity out of China. That really tells you something about the sheer scale, the complexity, the ecosystem built up in China over decades. It's not easy to replicate.
And it's more than just putting the phones together, right? Raw materials are a huge piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
How does China play that card?
Absolutely critical. India still depends heavily on China for key raw materials and components. And China uses export controls sometimes. It's described as a strategy of denial, basically limiting India's access to crucial inputs. It's a pretty sophisticated form of economic leverage. So the Indian government is now described as being on a war footing to find alternative sources, identifying 14 key sectors where this dependency is a major issue. It just shows how tangled these supply chains really are.
Which brings us smack into the middle of geopolitics. There were reports about Donald Trump directly warning Apple's Tim Cook about building iPhones in India. That definitely throws a wrench in the works. How did these kinds of policy uncertainties, maybe shifting winds in Washington from friendshoring towards more onshoring, how does that affect these really long-term diversification plans?
It creates huge headaches, frankly. That reported warning from Trump, I don't want you building in India, coupled with talk of new tariffs, it just highlights how political statements can destabilize years of careful strategic planning overnight. And economically, it's complex. Even if you slapped a 25% tariff on India-made iPhones, they'd likely still be way cheaper than making them in the U.S. Making them stateside could mean price jumps of like $150, $200 per phone. So this constant policy uncertainty makes those huge long-term investment decisions incredibly risky for companies.
And Minister Jaishankar has a pretty clear view on how countries like India should navigate this kind of pressure, doesn't he?
He certainly does. He sees Trump's approach, using tariffs for all sorts of reasons, trade and non-trade, as a major departure from past norms. He's also criticized what he called the selective application of tariffs, pointing to differences in how Russian oil imports were treated for India versus, say, Europe or China. His core message is really firm. India asserts its right to make decisions based purely on its own national interest. It's about strategic autonomy in a world with multiple power centers.
There's also the human factor, the workforce piece. India's workforce has historically been stronger in services, IT, software, less so in large-scale complex manufacturing, perhaps.
That's definitely a hurdle they're working on. India does face challenges in scaling up its manufacturing workforce skills. They often need foreign experts for training, and visa rules can complicate that. One source noted that New Delhi is learning a bitter lesson, realizing that China has truly mastered manufacturing both upstream and downstream, and has that deep pool of expertise. So, interestingly, this is leading India to make pragmatic moves. They're seeking critical tech from China where needed, even resetting ties to some extent. But at the same time, they're pursuing closer ties with the U.S. It's this strategy of multi-alignment. As another source put it, India recognizes it has to make friends across the board and can't afford to be purely political or ideological when forming partnerships needed to build its own capabilities.
Okay, so diversification sounds great on paper, solves problems. But like you said, it's complicated. Our sources suggest it's kind of a double-edged sword. What are some of those less obvious, maybe even counterintuitive risks companies run into when they try to diversify?
That's a really important point. One risk that sounds odd is over-diversification. Spreading yourself too thin, adding too many new suppliers too fast. Ironically, this can lead to less transparency, make management really inefficient, and could even trigger cascading failures if one weak link breaks. This is especially true for younger companies, maybe without the bandwidth to manage it all. And another thing, keeping track of ESG standards, environmental, social governance stuff, that gets way harder across a huge, complex network.
Right. And just finding those new partners in new markets, that's not straightforward either, is it? It's more involved than just a quick online search, I imagine.
Not at all. Understanding a new market and gaining access, that takes serious time and money. You need deep due diligence checking resources, labor availability, actual production capacity, and then there are the cultural and language differences. Those can significantly increase risk. Simple misunderstandings can blow up into major problems.
So even if you find a promising market, vetting the partners within it is a whole other challenge. It's not just about whether they can deliver that first shipment, right?
Exactly. That's what some call the first order illusion. It's easy to be impressed if a new supplier delivers that initial order on time and at the right price. But the real test is long-term reliability, consistency, quality. Finding genuinely reliable partners, especially when many might not even have much of an online footprint yet, is tough. The solution really lies in building deeper relationships, establishing better relationships, as one source put it. Ones built on transparency, shared values, not just quick transactions.
Which seems to tie into this idea MAG45 mentioned, the globalization dilemma. That really captures the core tension, doesn't it?
Yes, the globalization dilemma puts its finger right on it. It's this constant balancing act between seeking global cost efficiencies, sourcing from anywhere, versus building local resilience through nearshoring or reshoring. Bringing production closer reduces geopolitical risk, cuts lead time, sure, but it often means higher costs, maybe even a smaller pool of suppliers for specialized parts. So the real challenge for companies is finding their specific sweet spot, that right mix between global reach and local strength. It's not a one-size-fits-all answer.
Okay, so given all these complexities, all these potential traps, how do businesses and governments actually do this effectively? What are the practical steps someone takes to build a supply chain that's balanced and resilient in this, well, shifting landscape?
Well, connecting back to the bigger picture, it really has to be a strategic, planned process, not just frantic reactions when a crisis hits. Sources like BSI lay out some really practical steps. First, you have to constantly evaluate, really analyze where your current vulnerabilities are, know your weak spots. Second, set clear goals. What are you trying to achieve? Reduce dependency on one place, become more agile. Third, choose those new suppliers carefully. Do your homework. Fourth, build strong partnerships, real partnerships. Fifth, have a robust risk plan. Think through scenarios. What will you do when something goes wrong? Sixth, invest where it matters in technology for visibility, maybe, and in training your people. Seventh, stay flexible, be ready to adapt. Eighth, continuous monitoring is key. Watch supplier performance, keep an eye on industry trends. Ninth, collaborate closely. 10th, keep communication open and transparent throughout your network. It's a continuous cycle, really.
That's a solid roadmap. And governments have a big part to play too, right? They're not just leaving companies to figure this all out alone.
Absolutely not. Governments are actively supporting this. Take the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service, the TCS, as an example. They offer personalized advice to businesses, helping them figure out target markets, become more competitive, find actual opportunities, connect with contacts. They even have services like a market potential assessment, basically detailed intel on opportunities, barriers, competitors in a specific market. Plus, there are funding programs like CanExport. And governments leverage their free trade agreements. Canada has 15 FTAs covering 51 countries. They also provide tools with tariff and trade info. It's a multi-pronged effort to help businesses make these shifts.
And circling back to India, their whole approach of strategic autonomy and multi-alignment feels like a really relevant strategy for navigating this complex world.
It really does seem like a template for the times. Jashankar consistently emphasizes India's right to act in its own national interest. Their 21st century strategy is explicitly multi-alignment. That means maintaining good relations with diverse partners, Russia, the US, while also pragmatically resetting ties with China when it makes sense strategically. Like that source said, India has to make friends and can't be purely political or ideological about partnerships. It's pragmatic flexibility aimed at building national resilience in a messy world.
And for the supply chain leaders tuning in, MG45 kind of boiled this down to some core ongoing actions.
Yeah, their advice is really about continuous vigilance and action. Keep mapping your risks. Stress test your networks, see where they might break. Actively develop multi-sourcing options before you need them. Leverage technology for better visibility into your chain. Invest in those partnerships we talked about. And critically, always be balancing cost versus risk through that globalization approach. These aren't projects with an end date, they're ongoing ways of operating.
So pulling it all together, it's clear supply chain diversification isn't just some passing fad. It's a really fundamental rethinking of how the world makes things, trades things, consumes things. It's all about building resilience, building strategic autonomy in a world that feels, well, increasingly fragmented. Balancing those risks is crucial, not just to weather storms, but also to optimize resources, maybe even boost sustainability long term. It's complex, definitely challenging, but seems absolutely vital.
And maybe a final thought for you to consider. As nations and companies navigate this incredibly delicate balancing act, what role do we as individual consumers actually play? How might our choices, what we buy, where we prefer it comes from, local versus global, how might those choices be subtly driving or maybe even disrupting these huge global shifts, possibly without us even realizing the full impact?
Knowledge. Uncover the surprising facts and get you well informed on this quickly. We think it might challenge some common ideas and maybe give you a whole new way to look at crime.
Absolutely. And, this isn't a new question at all. People have been grappling with it for centuries. Way back, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius famously said, "Poverty is the mother of crime." It's a powerful line, very intuitive, but modern economics, sociology, they go much, much deeper than that simple saying. They ask, is it absolute poverty like, really not having basic needs met? Or is it income inequality, that gap you perceive between the haves and have-nots? That's the real driver. Could it be lack of education? Or maybe even, broader social dynamics happening within communities? We're going to explore all these different angles, and yes, some might really challenge your assumptions.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that. Our deep dive into the economic side really kicks off around 1968. There was this absolutely seminal paper by Gary Becker that just completely revolutionized how people thought about criminal behavior. Before Becker, criminal acts were often seen, well, pretty simplistically, right? Like stemming from mental illness or pathology or just inherent bad attitudes. Becker brought this entirely new, almost counterintuitive framework.
He really did. It was groundbreaking because he totally shifted the paradigm. Becker introduced the idea that choosing to commit a crime isn't just impulse or, being bad. It's actually an economic decision made by rational people.
Rational. That's the surprising part.
Well, rational in an economic sense. Individuals in this model basically weigh the expected rewards, financial or otherwise, from crime against what they could earn legally. And they factor in the chances of getting caught, getting punished, how severe that punishment might be. It's essentially a cost-benefit analysis. How do you allocate your time and resources? Legitimate work versus illegitimate activities. It's almost like choosing between two potential jobs, one legal, one not.
It's fascinating. And his insights, they were actually anticipated by some earlier work too, weren't they? Like Fleischer back in '63, looking at unemployment and youth crime. And Fleischer's later work in 1966 really highlighted something that feels intuitive. If your legal job prospects are just really low, if you're barely making ends meet legally, well, then the potential payoff from legal work might not seem that great. And crucially, for someone in that situation, the cost of getting caught, losing that already dismal legal income, it might seem relatively small. It's kind of a grim logic, isn't it?
It is. You can picture someone weighing their options and thinking, well, what do I really have to lose?
Okay.
Becker's model put a formal structure on this. It showed the supply of crime tends to go down when the probability of getting convicted goes up and when the severity of punishment goes up. But here's a really interesting twist. U.S. data looked at by Grogger in 91 suggested that increasing the chance of being arrested, that seems to be more effective than just making prison sentences longer.
More effective. Why would that be?
Well, it could be that criminals aren't perfectly risk neutral. They don't just calculate odds like a computer. Maybe they're very impatient. Valuing freedom right now much more than worrying about a potentially longer sentence way down the line if they even get caught.
Okay.
So for policymakers, this points towards a few levers, right? Reduce the benefits of crime, make getting caught much more likely, or increase the cost of punishment. But that likelihood of getting caught seems key.
Okay, so Becker gives us this rational choice idea, people weighing options. But then this really fundamental question pops up, a major point of debate in the research, with huge policy implications. Is it the sheer lack of resources, absolute poverty? Or is it that stark visual gap income inequality that's the main driver, especially for violent crime?
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just academic hair splitting. If it's absolute poverty, you focus on direct aid, social safety nets. If it's inequality, maybe you look at broader wealth redistribution. And a lot of the early studies, some really influential ones, they initially seem to point more towards income inequality being the big factor.
Indeed, that was the early leaning for many. Take Ehrlich's study from 1973 looking at U.S. state crime rates. What he found was actually quite counterintuitive for some people at the time. Higher median family incomes, they were associated with higher rates of murder, rape, assault, and property crimes.
Higher income, higher crime. That seems backwards.
It did seem backwards, and it contradicted Fleischer's earlier findings about average income reducing crime. However, Ehrlich did agree with Fleischer on one key point. Income inequality seemed linked to higher crime rates, so this early work just showed how tangled these relationships are. No easy answers. It really set the stage for decades of debate.
Right. But then, fast forward a bit, a more recent study from China Dong and colleagues in 2020 using this incredibly detailed court verdict data, specifically for homicide cases. It really throws a wrench into that common view that inequality is the main driver for violence. What they found after digging through all this granular data was that it's the poverty itself, the low income level, that is strongly and positively related to homicide rates, not so much the inequality measure.
Yeah, that's a significant finding. China provides this unique context, with its rapid economic shifts and huge population. It's like a massive natural experiment. And this Chinese study really bolsters the idea of absolute deprivation. That's the term they use, simply not having enough basic resources, food, shelter. It suggests that this absolute lack matters more for violent crime like homicide than relative deprivation, just feeling deprived compared to others who have more.
So feeling poor versus actually being poor, in a sense.
Kind of. Their conclusion, pretty robustly, is that the link between inequality and homicide often just vanishes once you properly account for measures of absolute poverty in the analysis. It really shifts the focus back maybe to the immediate, desperate struggle for survival as a driver for certain types of crime. That stark reality of not having enough might be a more potent predictor for violence than having less than others.
Okay, this is fascinating. Now, if you've ever wondered about those headlines connecting economic downturns to crime rates, well, the next study we looked at presents a real head-scratcher. Because if everything we've just discussed about opportunity cost holds true, economic theory would pretty much unambiguously predict that a severe shock to the job market, like a big financial crisis, should lead to a rise in crime.
Right. It makes logical sense.
Yeah. Fewer legal job options, lower pay. That lowers the opportunity cost of crime, makes illegal stuff seem relatively more attractive. But this study from Uppsala University by Granath in 2023, looking specifically at Sweden's financial crises, it tells a completely different, really surprising story.
It really does. It's quite a puzzle, given those standard economic predictions. Granath looked at the 2008 Great Recession and the earlier 1990s financial crisis in Sweden and found, wait for it, no significant effect.
No effect at all.
No significant effect on any crime category they measured or the overall crime rate at the local level. And this held true whether they looked at reported crimes or actual conviction data. Across robberies, burglaries, violent crimes, nothing.
Wow. Okay. So two major economic crises hit, and crime rates just didn't budge in the way the models would expect.
Pretty much. It's really unexpected.
So what's going on there? Why didn't crime spike in Sweden during these really tough economic times like the theory predicts? What did the researchers suggest?
Well, the key explanation offered points directly at Sweden's very robust welfare state.
Ah, the safety net.
Exactly. The research showed that social grants, participation in job market programs, these things increased significantly in the areas hit hardest by the crises. These weren't just small measures. They effectively cushioned the blow for many people. They softened the fall in income prospects. So even when the economy struggled, basic needs were largely met, and there were still pathways to employment or maybe retraining. And this seems to have significantly reduced the motivation to turn to crime out of desperation. They also found evidence that more people enrolled in university during the downturns. The opportunity cost of not working went down, so schooling became more attractive.
Right. Makes sense.
So these comprehensive social safety mechanisms seem to have effectively counteracted the economic pressures that you'd normally expect to lead to more crime.
So this suggests social policy isn't just like a cleanup effort after the fact. It can
Well,
actually change the whole equation.
it seems so. It suggests it's not just about deterring crime through punishment, but maybe about preventing the conditions that foster it in the first place through a strong societal safety net.
But this raises a big question for you listening, doesn't it? Can we really just take these findings from Sweden with its specific culture, its strong welfare system, and apply them directly to other countries? Countries like ours, maybe, or others with very different systems.
That's the crucial question of external validity, yeah.
Yeah.
It definitely makes you think about policy priorities.
For sure. Okay, so while these economic models are clearly powerful tools for understanding crime, it's obvious other things are going on too. Social factors, demographic factors, they're always part of the picture. Like, studies consistently show, for instance, that people involved in crime tend to have less education and often come from poorer backgrounds than people who aren't involved in crime.
Right. Education seems to play this really powerful dual role in deterring crime. First, pretty obviously, it raises skills and abilities. That usually leads to better wages, more legitimate job opportunities, and that increases the opportunity cost of crime. You have more to lose financially if you get caught.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond the money, education also seems to have what one researcher, Usher, called a civilization effect. It makes criminal choices more costly, psychologically, socially. Research by Lochner and Moretti back in 2001 strongly supported this. They found more schooling significantly reduces criminal activity, and they figured a big chunk of that was due to the higher wages education brings. It's about building a stake in legitimate society, both financially and socially.
Okay, so education is key. What about other individual characteristics? We often hear about age being a factor.
Oh, absolutely. There's a really strong, consistent link with age across many, many societies. Most crimes, statistically, are committed by younger people, youths. Criminal activity tends to ramp up through the teens, peaks in the late teens or early 20s, and then consistently declines afterwards.
Why is that pattern so consistent?
Well, the common explanation links back to that opportunity cost idea. Legitimate wages, the money you give up by not working legally, tend to rise pretty steeply with age, especially in early careers. For instance, Freeman, back in '91, he documented how a drop in real wages and job opportunities for less educated young men seemed to directly lead to more of them participating in criminal markets. For some young people, especially facing bleak legal prospects, crime might simply look like the more economically rational choice in the short term. Maybe a faster, though obviously riskier, path to getting some income. It's sobering. And it's not just about individual choices or characteristics, is it? Our environment, where we live, who we associate with, that shapes things too.
Oh, profoundly. It's not just you, it's the context. Social factors, interactions, networks, they're all strongly correlated with crime rates. Criminal activity can sometimes feel contagious in high crime areas, maybe because the social stigma is lower, or the perceived chance of getting arrested feels lower. Plus, the costs of acquiring inputs for crime, as economists might put it, like finding accomplices or opportunities, might be lower in those areas too.
Right.
There's a really striking study by Ludwig and others from 2000. They looked at families who were part of a program that helped them move from high-poverty neighborhoods to low-poverty ones, and they found this move significantly cut down on juvenile crime among those kids, in some cases by like 30 to 50%.
Wow, that's huge.
It is. It just underscores the incredible measurable impact your social and physical environment can have on behavior and choices. Okay, so we've dug into the academic papers, the economic models, the sociological studies, but sometimes you get really interesting insights when these ideas hit the messy real world. We actually found this really vibrant online debate on Reddit. Someone asked the simple question: does poverty drive crime, or does crime drive poverty?
Ah, the classic chicken or egg.
Exactly. And what's striking was how many people jumped in saying, hey, it's not that simple. They recognized it as what academics might call a false dichotomy,
Yeah.
forcing an either choice when reality is more complex. Lots of people said it's more like that chicken or egg thing, or a feedback loop where crime and poverty are just deeply tangled up, each potentially causing or worsening the other.
That makes sense. And did specific themes emerge from that discussion?
Yeah, one interesting point that came up repeatedly was about joblessness.
Lack of work specifically.
Some people argue that it's the lack of meaningful work that correlates most strongly with crime, maybe even more than just general low income. The idea being that work provides not just income, but purpose. It occupies your time, your mind, your hands. It contributes to better mental health, maybe better physical health too.
Yeah, structure, self-worth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that having that structure and purpose helps lower crime rates across different groups. It's about more than just the paycheck. It's about engagement in something productive.
That resonates with the economic idea of opportunity cost, too, in a broader sense. Losing that structure and purpose is also a cost.
For sure. And that Reddit discussion also brought up another really critical point, something that often gets glossed over. How we even define crime in the first place, and who actually gets prosecuted for what.
Ah, yes. The social construction of crime. Crucial point.
Because it's not always objective, is it? The labels aren't universal.
Not at all. What one society, or maybe more accurately, the power structure within a society, labels as a crime can vary dramatically. And this often reflects underlying biases. Take wage theft, for example. An employer illegally taking money from an employee's paycheck.
Right. Happens all the time.
It does. And it potentially costs society, collectively, far more money each year than all property crimes like burglary and shoplifting combined. Yet, in many places, it's treated primarily as a civil matter, not a criminal offense requiring jail time.
Meanwhile, someone shoplifting baby formula might face serious criminal charges.
Precisely. That stark difference really highlights how societal biases can affect what actions get defined as crime, which crimes get reported, which get prosecuted, and ultimately who gets punished. The powerful and the poor often face vastly different systems and consequences for comparable or even less harmful actions.
It's a reminder that the legal system itself isn't some perfectly objective machine. It's built and run by people within a specific social context.
Exactly.
Wow, what a deep dive this has been. We've really covered some ground. We started with Becker's revolutionary idea of rational choice, reframing crime as an economic decision.
Yeah.
Then we saw that surprising twist from Sweden, where a strong welfare state seemed to completely break that expected link between economic crisis and rising crime. We explored that whole debate around absolute poverty versus relative inequality, with those really eye-opening findings from China suggesting absolute deprivation might be key for certain violent crimes.
Right.
We saw how crucial education is, how age plays a role, how much our social environment shapes us. And finally, we grappled with that complex, messy chicken or egg feedback loop between crime and poverty, and even questioned how crime itself gets defined and prosecuted based on societal biases.
It really shows that understanding crime isn't about finding one single simple cause. It's just not there. It's about recognizing this dynamic, incredibly intricate interplay of all these factors: economic pressures, social structures, individual characteristics, policy choices. And as we saw with that Swedish example, which is really thought-provoking, robust social policies can potentially disrupt that seemingly inevitable link between economic hardship and crime. It offers a different path, maybe, than focusing solely on punishment after the fact. So, maybe the final thought for you, listening, is this. How might our societies rethink crime prevention, not just through policing and prisons and deterrence, but by also proactively addressing those fundamental economic and social conditions, the ones that shape people's choices, their opportunities, their sense of having a real stake in society? Could fostering a more resilient, more equitable path for everyone be the most effective long-term crime prevention strategy?